that is probably one of the greatest ever intro music you'll ever see or hear in your life. John Williams, I mean, what else can I say about it? And it's definitely the staple point of Star Wars. You see that Star Wars logo, you hear that music, you're automatically pumped up. Am I a Star Wars fan? You can't see it, but yes, I'm a Star Wars fan. Massive Star Wars fan, actually, of the original trilogy. What makes the original trilogy so good? Well, this is what I'm going to be doing today. I'm going to be having a wee discussion with my camera. Hopefully, I'll be having a discussion with someone over the Star Wars original trilogy, what happened in the prequels, and then what J.J. Abrams and Disney will be doing with it, hopefully, in the 7th, 8th and 9th installment. Because let's be honest, these things comes in threes. So, the Star Wars original trilogy, what happened in that? Well, it started off as basically just away from cowboy movies. Back in the day, you know, it was all cheesy and fun, and this took a little bit more serious direction. I mean, Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, these were all people that relatively they were known to a point, not really massive as they are now. Of course, they're massive staples in culture these days, but back then they were like, yeah, but this is never really going to be taken seriously. Well, yeah, it was actually. Why? Because it was such a cinematic difference that we loved it. But it was done so well. At the beginning of it, like I said, that title music with the title screen, Star Wars, and you get the scrolling text, just giving you that little introduction. And it was all, the word choice in that was absolutely perfect. We get the intro, which is, you know, the little battlecraft or the telecommunications ship, and then the massive Star Destroyer coming in behind it. Absolutely fantastic, well done. Probably one of the best intros to any movie. It sets the scene, it sets the standard, and then of course we see Darth Vader. Now, we already, from that little get-go, we could probably tell what Darth Vader was. Just at that point, as a newbie, you know, my uncle went to go see it, so we have had a lot of discussions on Star Wars, and when he first went to go see it, and he was like, already you could see that Darth Vader was someone to be messed with. He was a massive guy. He was in all black. He was, you know, the stormtroopers, they were the guys in white. He was the guy in black. He was the one that people could see in a sea of white, of white, essentially, which was amazing, to be fair. And he said that was the best intro. And then when he started speaking as well, but you know, and again, I think, going into the prequels, Darth Vader was an all-powerful guy, kind of like a lion, or kind of like a tiger, you know, king of the jungle. Well, could be, yeah, he's strong enough, but was he? Well, not in the first one, definitely not. I mean, he took orders and kind of had people take the piss out of him, but I mean, he was strong enough to basically go, I find your lack of faith disturbing, and it would kill them, so the guy wasn't afraid to kill, to assert his dominance, but he wasn't afraid to stand back and say, well, this guy's a little bit smarter than me, even though, you know, this guy could have had the force around him. What made him quite interesting was the fact that he was smart enough to sit back and say, well, this guy kind of knows wars better than me. You know, I could go in and take out a whole army of people if I wanted, but this guy will be the guy that, you know, will be controlling it all and making sure that everything goes well. Of course, in the original Star Wars, we're introduced to Luke Skywalker, we're introduced to Obi-Wan, we're introduced to everything like that. We're also introduced to the Force. The Force is all around us, it penetrates us, it's what gives the Jedi its power, and then we're introduced to a lightsaber as well. It's the tool of the Jedi, there we go, that's all we need to know. It's cool, it's pretty awesome, it can deflect, laser fire, it can take someone's arm off like that. But there was blood as well in this one, so we get the fight scenes weren't too good, but the fight scenes, especially between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, had a lot of heart involved in them, considering the fact that we hear Obi-Wan talk about how Darth Vader used to be his best friend, or used to be a friend, used to be very strong with the Force, and then he was seduced by the dark side. These are all emotional. This is dead emotional when these two come together to trade blow for blow. I mean, that in itself, you're kind of thinking, whoa, that's weird, you know. When I first met you, I was with the apprentice, and now I am the master, and you know that is an emotional connection that it doesn't matter how big your fight scene is. If you don't have that emotional connection, then it does not work. The original one was actually directed by George Lucas. Who knew? And the guy says in many interviews back in those days that, you know, a special effect on its own is just a special effect. You need story behind it. You need characters. You need everything else. And well, you know, words to live by there, George. Anyway, the second Star Wars movie is definitely something I'm going to go on and speak about. You know, because I think it's probably the best. Enter The Empire Strikes Back. The Empire Strikes Back continues on from Star Wars A New Hope. Again, it furthers on the story of Luke's training and how he continues on with Obi-Wan. It introduces Yoda, who is someone who is a master of the Force. Doesn't need weapons, doesn't carry them. We don't see Yoda with a lightsaber. I'm pretty sure it actually kind of makes fun of like the whole fighting aspect of weapons. You know, he manages to take the ship out of the swamp with his own. You know, I'm just kind of talking about the Jedi's, by the way. I'm not actually talking about Han Solo or Princess Leia. I'm just talking about Jedi's, because although the whole romance aspect is very interesting, it is interesting, definitely. I'm talking about it from a kid aspect. I'm really only caring about the Jedi's. And the reason I'm only talking about the Jedi's is because that's really the only thing that follows through in all 6 movies. Of course, the romance aspect between, you know, Han Solo and Princess Leia is a big thing, and it's handled very beautifully, especially in the Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So, you know, congratulations to that. They did the directors of these two are different from George Lucas, of course they are. Speaking of which, actually, I will probably end up pausing this for a wee second, mainly because I need to go check something. Sorry about that. Well, The Empire Strikes Back was not directed by George Lucas. It was actually directed by Irvin Kershner. Yeah, I had to go look that up, and the reason I didn't do it before the video was because I kind of wanted to illustrate a point. As a massive Star Wars fan, and as a massive fan of how movies are made and all that kind of stuff, I had to go look up who this guy was, because George Lucas is the face of Star Wars, and yet I personally believe that he didn't even, you know, he wasn't involved in the two. Well, he was involved, of course, but he wasn't the main director. His visions were slightly different for a lot of things, and the two best movies in the entire franchise were not directed by him. The Empire Strikes Back has the greatest lightsaber battle between, you know, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, who, you know, we have that epic twist as well happening in this movie. The fact that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's son, you know, Obi-Wan was essentially just trying to help him, try to save him from that reality. These are all great, and it does add that aspect to Darth Vader where you're thinking, alright, maybe you're could be a tortured soul that was good in you, and that whole concept of seduced by the dark side makes a bit of sense. But we still see that father in him. We still see that he's not going to kill his son. I mean, yeah, he'll take his arm off, but he doesn't kill him. Throughout that whole fight, at the end, we see how Darth Vader is toying with him. Half the time he's just using one arm, just doesn't care about hurting his son, or doesn't care about killing his son. He's still trying to win him over, saying, as father and son, we can rule this universe. So, of course, it was seduced by the dark side, seduced by power and greed. See every single white politician out there. And possibly, but yeah. So that one in itself is definitely, for me, the best movie, because it tackles, it has one of the greatest twists, and it does tackle the whole father-son aspect, but it also shows a light into Darth Vader as more of a character as well, because he's a father that doesn't want to kill his son. Someone who is seduced by the dark side won't kill his son, which would be an extremely dark thing to do. We see him kill Obi-Wan, his best friend, someone who he's arguably spent so much more time with. He'll kill him like that, and yet, when it comes to his son, even though he hasn't seen his son in so many years, he still has that paternal instinct that basically says, yeah, I'm not going to kill my son. But of course, it leads us on to part 3. Yeah, so part 3 is essentially Return of the Jedi, and it's an okay movie. The first half of the movie is definitely interesting. I paused this again mainly because I had to look up the director of this one as well, Richard Marquand. Marquand. He's the director of this movie once again, which definitely 60% of this movie is amazing. As soon as you enter the furries, I kinda lose interest, if I'm being truly honest with you. Mainly because I'm not a huge fan of those characters, and I'm not a huge fan of the fact that, sticks and stones can beat stormtroopers. I can't buy that, but apart from that, the entire movie in itself is actually really interesting. Again, it continues on the story pretty well. We have Luke in the full black attire. He's pretty badass now. And he is no longer a Jedi in training. He's more of a fully developed, mature Jedi. Although he's got the full black on, reminiscent of his father, he definitely has good intentions, and this echoes through all of his movements. We see Jabba the Hutt now. If you haven't actually seen the, altered version that George Lucas was desperate to put out to us, then you would have been able to see sorry, you wouldn't have been able to see Jabba the Hutt in the original one. So this would have been the first time you see Jabba the Hutt, and he's a big giant slug basically, and he puts Princess Leia in a bikini, and everyone loves it. But we also see how Luke handles everything. He handles the Rancor, this massive monster, basically just by lobbing a skull and kills it. But you know what? It's a good movie. We see Luke being awesome throughout the entire movie. We see the death of Yoda, which is completely emotional. The movie itself is amazing, and then obviously you have the furries killing stormtroopers. Don't agree with that, but then we also have the Emperor try to seduce Luke, and then we have Darth Vader killing the Emperor. Oh, essentially, throughout the three movies, you can definitely see that Darth Vader goes full circle. We see him as a bad guy. We hear about his past. That's all we need to do. We just need to hear about his past. We know that he was a good guy at one point. We don't need to see how good he was. That the whole concept of being told that he's a good guy, and the whole concept of the way we see he doesn't want to kill his son, these all hint that he was a good guy at one point. And then eventually we have the redemption shown us. Ultimately, the paternal instincts of a father win us over. He doesn't even need to be a good guy. As long as he's just a good father, we can probably empathise with that. And there we go, sorted. Star Wars, the original trilogy. Is it perfect? Well, no, not really. There was an incest cast between Luke and Leia at one point. But you know what? The movies themselves go down in history as being one of the best trilogies out there. And then the prequels happened. Oh God, the prequels happened. Forget what you loved about Star Wars, because George Lucas takes the helm and fucks it up. Basically, just fucks it all up. I mean, the two best movies were directed by different people. There was actually someone else that was writing the Star Wars movies alongside George Lucas. Lawrence Kasdan was one of the people that was credited by writing the screenplay, at least in the original trilogy. So that in itself tells me that George Lucas isn't the be-all that ends all for Star Wars. Yes, he wrote it, but he wrote it with someone else, or two other people, I'm sure. The other name wouldn't load. He directed one of the movies, but it was the weakest one in the original trilogy, but he still directed it. He set the spark, but that was all. The other two directors came in and ignited it, used that spark, gave it oxygen, and nursed this flame. So why the fuck then is George Lucas coming back and stealing the helm? I mean, he has good actors, that come in, and they don't really do a good job. We see Obi-Wan when he's younger, and I think a lot of people were like, oh my god, that's Obi-Wan when he's younger, that's really cool. And we see Qui-Gon Jinn, played by Liam Neeson, and I don't think a lot of people really knew who Liam Neeson was at this point. But yeah, Jesus Christ, this movie, the Phantom Menace, was boring. A lot of people sum that up. The characters were non-existent. There was no characters that you could really say, oh yeah, that was could sum them up in a few words that couldn't. You couldn't sum these people up without describing their personal appearance. And even at the end of the movie, when they were doing their test screening, George Lucas even said, screwed up. He admitted, that was the first time that he admitted he had made a mistake, but he's reluctant to really do anything about it. So that trend of horribleness just continued on. But the main problem with the prequels is the fact that they're directed by one person, and it was completely him. It was him that took the helm, that bossed everyone about. He wouldn't take any constructive criticism. He even says in an interview in the special features that he fired someone because they didn't have the same vision as him, and he just couldn't have that. Yeah. Even though in the original trilogy other people took the helm and done something amazing with it, but creative differences there, George. So this just continues on. This trend continued on. People wouldn't speak about him. People wouldn't speak to him, and now every producer is pretty much backing away from which is fine, fair point, I get that. But you know what, man? Creative integrity. Everyone that was working with him should have said, do you know what, George? Maybe you should take a fucking look because you hated the first one. Why don't you do something different for the second one and let us help you? Of course not, nothing happens. The second one's just as worse. It's got a terrible title. In fact, the first one's got a terrible title. The Phantom Menace. Jesus Christ. The original titles were A New Hope, which is, oh, hope for what? You know, and then we find out about the Empire, and we're like, oh, well, you know, a rebellion coming up. The Empire Strikes Back. Like, that just in itself creates war images. And Return of the Jedi, which was actually going to be called Revenge of the Jedi. These two titles work either way. And what do we have to kick off the new trilogy? The Phantom Menace. Being a menace doesn't connotate, you know, being evil, having skill, taking on people. It doesn't connotate any of that. Dennis the fucking Menace, that's what that connotates. You know, a kind of annoyance. I think the Phantom Menace people, that's what they actually called George Lucas whilst making this movie, and he overheard someone saying it, and he was like, oh, that is a good title. So, yeah, Attack of the Clones, again, not exactly the greatest of fucking titles, and it doesn't make sense because they don't actually attack. Everything in these movies, the prequels destroy everything that the original set out to do. They put a price on the Force. You know, the Force was originally this thing that was around us all, penetrates us all, and if you were so, you know, if you wanted to go out and essentially be a good person and take control of the Force, you could do that. You could master your own will, but instead George Lucas changes that to midichlorians. Midichlorians, yep. He introduces Jar Jar Binks, he introduces a child actor. Do you know what, as well? I actually think that some directors should be held accountable for what happens to some of the actors, especially the kid that played Anakin Skywalker. So many people hated him, but, I mean, you look at the way Natalie Portman, Hayden Christensen, Ewan McGregor, Liam Neeson, the way they all kind of act is kind of just still like a board, and this kid really didn't, because he wasn't an adult. Like, these people kind of get the brunt of it, and you know what, I think George Lucas should have been held accountable, not him. But yeah, Attack of the Clones happens. Doesn't really further any story at all. But I mean, why put a 10 plus year gap between your first movie and your second movie? It doesn't make much sense to me. And we also see a bunch of Jedi, you know, involved in a war, which is hilarious because in the original one we get told that the Jedi weren't actually soldiers. I'm pretty sure that someone in one of the movies actually says, yeah, we will not fight for you. So in that, I think it was Mace Windu that said that, played by Samuel Jackson. So in that sense, George Lucas just goes back and shits on the originals again. And we have Revenge of the Sith. People say that this is the best one because we get to see Darth Vader, but you know what? Throughout all of these movies, the main thing that George Lucas had to do was show us that Anakin Skywalker was a good guy, because he's basically talking about the origins of Darth Vader. Even though I don't actually think Darth Vader was a strong enough character in the originals to actually be a part of like 6 movies, like to be the crux of the original 3 movies, the prequels, sorry. I don't think he was a strong enough built character, because I don't think they ever intended him to be this be all that ends all in Star Wars. George Lucas just took that initiative. Well, now we have 3 movies that talk about his origin, his adulthood, and his intro to Jedi, and then his seduction. The dark side, they don't even get that right. The relationship between Obi-Wan and him is non-existent. The seduction between him and the dark side is essentially just Emperor Palpatine, or the Emperor, basically saying, yeah, I can show you how to save Padme because you've seen her die, but you have to become bad. And that happens in one movie. I mean, we see him lose his shit now and then against Sand People, but we really don't see any seduction of the dark side. So, George Lucas ultimately fails in general. And it becomes clearly obvious when you see the way he directs. He just sits in his fat arse and drinks a coffee most of the fucking time. So, Should George Lucas have done the prequels? Of fucking course not. It should have been a group of people doing the prequels, but George Lucas just didn't care. He really didn't. And I mean, you watch, if you really want to know, watch the behind the scenes, and you'll even see his attitude towards this thing that his whole fucking career was near enough built on. So what should J.J. Abrams do? Well, let me get on to that one. J.J. Abrams should do his best to focus on the Empire side. I don't think he should limit his story to one person like George Lucas did. I think Abrams needs to have a bigger scope, because George Lucas essentially took a universal story and tried to just combine it into one character. Ultimately, he failed at doing that anyway, but Abrams needs to be more ambitious in his scope. He needs to show us the Empire. I mean, because this is taking place after the Mark Hamill version, the original. So we need to see the birth of a new empire, of a new kind of generation of evil. He also needs to tone it down in the special effects, and he needs to be smarter with the audience. He needs to, he needs to realise that we can work things out for ourselves, given situation, tone, look of the person. So, but do you know what? I've seen Star Trek, the two that he done, and I have complete faith in J.J. Abrams. I have complete faith in Cancer over George Lucas, because at least Cancer is able to fucking succeed at something. I really don't like George Lucas, and I know so many other people that don't as well. And then this kind of angers me, because this guy has made billions off of the Star Wars prequels, and yet he didn't care about them. I mean, who does that? Why go so far to something that you don't care about? Oh yeah, greed. Because that's what this world fucking is. It's just run by assholes that just want fucking money. But anyway, sorry to end in a really bad tone, but that was just my discussion over the Star Wars universe. And I have full faith in J.J. Abrams, and I can't wait for episode 7. Thank you.